Welcome back to the deep dive. So you've handed us this incredible stack of sources detailing what has just exploded into the most serious spat between the U.S. and India in, what, decades?
In at least 2 decades, yeah.
So today, our mission is to break this down, but not just as a policy issue. We're going to treat this like we're scripting a massive geopolitical thriller. Let's call it Project Billion.
I think that's the perfect frame. This isn't just some minor trade adjustment. We are looking at a U.S. tariff on Indian exports that has escalated to just a staggering 50%.
50%. I mean, that's a number that just jumps off the page.
It's almost unheard of for a strategic partner. It's a full-blown trade war scenario.
Right. It's the kind of thing you do to an adversary, not an ally. So this sets the stage for our crisis script perfectly. And the core question is just why? It's already being called the worst crisis in 20 years.
And that's the central drama, the real challenge for our script. What on earth could trigger this kind of overwhelming economic force, especially, when both sides are saying they're still at the negotiating table?
It's a survival mission for India's entire trade policy.
It really is.
Okay, so let's get into the anatomy of this mega tariff. The sources show it's not just one big hit. It's more like a 1-2 punch, building the drama.
Exactly. It didn't just appear at 50%. The first stage, the initial 25% that hit on August 1st, was framed as a, quote, reciprocal measure.
So sort of standard trade dispute stuff.
Yeah.
Tense, but manageable.
Right. It was mostly about the U.S. trade deficit with India, something they've been talking about for years.
But then comes the second act. This is where our script gets its villain, its motive, the additional 25% penalty.
Effective August 27th. And this one had nothing to do with the trade deficit, not even close.
This was all about Russia.
100%. It was tied directly to India's continued and, frankly, massive imports of Russian oil. So it transforms the whole thing from, economic friction into a clear geopolitical pressure campaign.
And the message was what? Get in line with our sanctions or else?
Pretty much. And India's response was immediate and defiant. They called the tariffs unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable.
They also brought up their policy of strategic autonomy. For anyone listening, what does that actually mean in practice?
It's really the core principle of India's foreign policy. It means they reserve the right to make decisions based on their own national interest, period, regardless of pressure from the U.S. or China or anyone else.
And in this case, that means cheap energy for 1.4 billion people.
Exactly. That's a much, much higher priority for them than falling in line with U.S. sanctions on Russia. It's about domestic stability.
The economic stakes here are just. They're almost hard to comprehend. The sources say these tariffs put up to 70% of India's exports to the U.S. at risk.
70%, yeah.
If this was a movie script, that's the moment the whole command center starts flashing red.
It is. That tariff structure shot India's trade-weighted tariff rate up to 35%, which makes them, completely uncompetitive compared to their neighbors.
And we're already seeing the fallout.
Oh, yeah. The dominoes are falling.
Right.
We're seeing firms like Posha, the tech manufacturer, and Cradlewise. They were all in on moving supply chains to India.
The whole China plus one strategy.
Right. And that just evaporated. Overnight, they've stalled everything.
Oh, okay, so let's pivot. Because every Project Billion script needs that deep personal drama. And the sources are suggesting this wasn't just about oil or trade. It was about pride.
Yeah, the source material is shockingly specific about this. It details these alleged diplomatic snubs that really seem to personalize the whole conflict.
First up was the dinner.
The dinner, right. The diplomatic equivalent of being stood up. Prime Minister Modi apparently declined President Trump's invitation for a stopover dinner in Washington back in June.
And the reason he said he had to get to Odisha, the land of Lord Jagannath.
Essentially picking a domestic political event over a very symbolic meeting with the U.S. president. It was a subtle message, but a clear one.
But that's not the central theory, is it? The big plot twist, according to Jeffrey's group of all places, is the peace prize rejection.
This is the core of it, according to them. The theory is that the tariffs were driven mainly by the president's personal anger after India refused to back his claim that he'd mediated the May 2025 India-Pakistan ceasefire.
Hold on a second. A major investment bank is actually putting this out there, that this is about a missed award.
I know, it sounds like gossip, doesn't it?
It does. How seriously do we take that versus the, hard facts of the Russian oil?
Well, it sounds speculative, but here's the thing. When financial analysts start baking personal grudges into their official trade forecasts, you have to take it seriously. It suggests that for this administration, policy might be driven by personal validation, not just geopolitics.
And a Nobel Peace Prize would have been huge validation,
Massive. So the rejection was seen as a major, deliberate slight.
which makes that secondary layer, the sort of geopolitical conspiracy theory, even more potent.
Right. You have former diplomat Vika Swarup linking U.S. aggression not just to trade, but specifically to India's role in BRICS and refusing to credit Trump for the peace deal.
And then Jake Sullivan, the former national security advisor, comes in and suggests the whole thing might be linked to business interests.
He does. He points to these agreements from April 2025 between a Trump-backed crypto platform, World Liberty Financial, and the Pakistan Crypto Council, suggesting a pro-Pakistan tilt might have other motives.
We've officially crossed from a trade negotiation into an episode of a political thriller.
The fallout for security cooperation was immediate. There were reports, which were later denied, that India paused $3.6 billion in defense deals.
Stryker vehicles, Boeing aircraft.
Yeah. The defense ministry called the reports false and fabricated, but the uncertainty alone just cast this huge shadow over the upcoming Quad summit, a huge risk to multilateral coordination.
Okay, let's look at India's countermove, the economic survival mission, because they are not folding.
Not at all. Which leads to this great quote from U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer. He called India a very difficult nut to crack.
That says a lot, doesn't it?
It really does. It speaks to their resolve. But what's fascinating is in the next breath, he says India's proposals are among the best offers Washington has ever received.
So they're playing hardball, but they're also being realistic. They know they have to give something.
Exactly. But there are two lines they absolutely will not cross.
And this is about protecting their domestic political base.
100%. The first is the agricultural shield. They are flat out refusing concessions on politically sensitive crops. We're talking corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, and especially dairy.
Because that's the farmer vote.
A massive, powerful voting bloc, conceding there could be politically destabilizing for the government.
And the Gary issue is especially tricky, right? The sources mention cultural concerns.
It's very specific. In India, there's significant cultural and religious sensitivity and consumer resistance to the U.S. practice of feeding cattle certain animal byproducts.
Got it.
You combine that with a general wariness of GMOs, and opening up the dairy market becomes a complete political non-starter for them, no matter how painful the tariffs are.
So with agriculture off the table, Modi had to pivot. He couldn't look weak, so he started looking for new friends.
And this is a huge diplomatic chess move. He travels to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit.
This is a big deal.
It's massive. It's his first visit to Beijing since the border clashes in 2020. He's signaling to Washington that, partnership is a two-way street.
He's showing that strategic autonomy isn't just talk.
Exactly. And it's not just China and Russia. They're aggressively pursuing deals with the EU, the GCC, the EFTA, building on that UK free trade deal they signed in July. They are actively de-risking their reliance on the U.S.
All right, let's get to the financial climax. Where did the market feel the pain?
The currency market. Immediately.
Yeah.
The Indian rupee, the INR, it hit a record low of 90.25 against the dollar.
Oof.
Yeah, volatility just spiked. Investors were trying to price in the risk of this 50% tariff war dragging on.
So let's frame this as a betting challenge.
Yep.
You have the BofA bulls versus the UBS cautious camp. Two totally different stories about India's future.
That's a good way to put it. The bulls at Bank of America are surprisingly optimistic. They think this is all due to temporary global shocks like the strong dollar, not some dup weakness in India's economy.
And their prediction.
They're forecasting the rupee will climb all the way back to 86 to the dollar by the end of 2026. They're betting on India's long-term growth story.
Okay, so then you have UBS, the cautious voice.
Right. They're much more focused on the political risk. They've raised their forecast range to a weaker but stable 90 to 92 against the dollar.
And their forecast depends on what?
It's all conditional on a trade deal. If the tariff comes down from 50% to something like 15 to 25%, the currency stabilizes. If not, it stays weak.
And where is the RBI, the referee in all this?
They are being very, very disciplined. Governor Sanjay Malhotra basically said they don't target a specific level for the rupee. They let it find its correct level.
So they're not fighting the market.
No, their job is just to reduce abnormal or excessive volatility. They'll step in to prevent chaos, but they won't try to change the price that the political drama is setting.
So they're letting the market price in the risk of a 50% tariff.
That's exactly right.
So let's wrap this up for our Project Billion finale. We have a conflict triggered by personal slights, amplified by geopolitics. And it forced India into this big strategic pivot towards Moscow and Beijing.
The takeaway is pretty clear. The administration's America First policy prioritized a short-term trade win over a long-term strategic alliance.
And in doing so, they risk pushing one of their most important partners closer to the BRICS bloc.
Exactly. Closer to Russia and China.
The tariff is still at 50%. And while most analysts think a face-saving deal will get it down to maybe 20% by year-end, the damage is real, and it's mounting every day.
At a higher level, the whole crisis just reinforces India's commitment to its multipolar alignment. They will work with the U.S. where it makes sense, like on countering China.
But they won't compromise their ties with Russia or their own domestic stability just to please Washington.
Never.
Okay, so now for the ultimate cliffhanger. The final plot twist you'd never see coming in a trade story. The sources suggest this might not even be decided by presidents or negotiators.
This is where it gets really interesting. The U.S. Supreme Court is expected to rule in early 2026 on the legality of the law that was actually used to authorize these tariffs.
The IEEP Act.
The International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It gives the president broad authority to regulate commerce during a national emergency.
But its use here is being challenged.
It is. Critics are arguing it's an unconstitutional overreach of executive power, basically using an emergency law to set long-term trade policy without Congress.
So wait. If the Supreme Court rules that the president overstepped,
then the entire legal foundation for this 50% tariff could just disappear.
the whole thing could collapse.
Exactly. If the act is ruled unauthorized for this purpose, the trade situation could reset literally overnight. The tariff could drop back to 25% automatically, no matter what the negotiators are doing or what personal grudges exist.
That's the biggest wild card in this entire saga. It's a massive legal risk hanging over a purely political and economic fight.
Absolutely.
Makes you wonder, right? Which countries, which trading firms are positioning themselves right now for that legal reset button to be pressed?
That is the ultimate strategic question. How do you cut a deal when the whole game board might be flipped over by a court in 6 months?
Something for you to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Project Billion's geopolitical gauntlet. See you next time.